Welcome, listeners near and far, to the Pima County Democracy Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We are stronger together, and we are especially grateful to our subscribers and those who share our content. From the Walking the Walk series to the Legislative Review, from democracy on the front lines to 2 Minutes of Truth. Let's get started with this episode of Walking the Walk. Welcome, listeners. This is Eric Robbins, and I am joined here today with Chris Elsner, who is a candidate for Ward 5. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Hey, Eric. Great to be here.
I appreciate your making time for us. Can you share with us a little bit about your personal history? What's the arc that brought you to Tucson and has led you to being a candidate?
Sure. So I was born in Arizona up in Pinetop Lakeside in the White Mountains. So lived there for a time when I was younger, moved to Southern California for a little while, and then we moved back to Pinetop Lakeside. And then my mom and I moved to the northwest suburbs of Chicago to be closer to her family. So spent quite a while living there, went to undergraduate at Northern Illinois University, got a bachelor's in English and minor in Chinese studies. And after graduating, I joined the Peace Corps. And then I served in 2000, or from 2008 to 2010 as an education volunteer in Ukraine. So a fantastic experience. Ended up meeting my wife there. She was another Peace Corps volunteer. After Peace Corps service, I was looking to go to graduate school and applied to University of Arizona. Ended up getting into U of A and got into the Coverdell Fellowship Program, which is something for returned Peace Corps volunteers that they can take advantage of. And then the girl I met, my wife, is also from Tucson. So it was win-win-win. Come to Tucson in 2011. We bought our house in the Arroyo Chico neighborhood in 2012 and lived there ever since. And so now Tucson is home.
Very nice. And as somebody who also relocated to Tucson, I'm just going to declare that if you've lived here for at least 3 summers, I think you count as an honorary native. Lots of people I know moved here in May and moved away in August and never came back. So if you don't mind, share with us a little bit about the priorities and issues that you're focused on that have led you to seeking office at this time.
Sure. So I've always had a very strong commitment to public service and servant leadership. That was one of the driving factors for me joining Peace Corps. I've done a lot of work volunteering with nonprofits over the years. But, you know, the thing that really impacts us the most is what happens at the state and local level. And so in knocking on doors, there have been 2 things that have really come up more than anything else. The perennial issue of roads and why are they so awful in Tucson for so many people, and issues of the homeless and unhoused population. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in the community to address those issues because they are having a pretty big impact on people's day-to-day lives. I think the probably 3rd most salient issue would be housing affordability. That's a big issue facing many people in our community and making it very difficult for families to get going in Tucson, and find places to live. And I think that's also, contributing to a lot of the homeless and unhoused population as well.
Got it. Thank you. And for those who've never run for office, which would be most of us, I sometimes describe a tier of involvement, people who vote on a regular basis. And then I describe people who are activated, who might be involved in, helping people get elected or maybe protesting. They're a step beyond voting, and then all the way up to being a candidate. What is it like to run for office, and what's that experience been like for you?
It's been pretty crazy. Since I declared my candidacy about 6.5 weeks ago, it's felt kind of like 6.5 years in some ways. Also, there's a lot of stuff going on at the federal level, which has made the past, couple of months pretty crazy as well. But I can't remember a time in my life where I've been as busy.
And what kinds of things are you hearing when you're knocking on doors, Chris?
Like I was saying, I think the big things that have come up for most people are, locally speaking, roads and the homeless issues. People are pissed about a lot of stuff going on in this country. And I feel, that is something where I am very passionate about as a candidate, because I understand that frustration and anger that so many people in our community have, that they feel like politicians are not listening, that the government is not working for them. Working families, are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're just trying to get a roof over their head and food on their kids' tables. And no matter how hard they work, they can't get ahead. They can't afford a house. They don't have stability for their families. We don't have a great educational system. Their kids, worry about, where are they going to go to school? How are, they going to get a good education? How are their kids going to be successful and have a better life than they are? And I think in many ways, on many levels, we are failing our, citizens. I think the Democratic Party is just as guilty of this as the Republican Party in a lot of ways, that we are not listening to the community. And so I'm a very progressive Democrat myself, but I don't expect everyone in the community to agree with everything, that I have to say, everything that I think. So I'm also very pragmatic, and I really believe in being a representative. I want to listen to the people in my community, regardless of what party they're in, and make sure that I'm hearing their needs, hearing their concerns. I want them to feel heard and feel like somebody is listening to them, and then use my skills and experience to take those needs and concerns and figure out ways that we can make our community better through public policy, laws, ordinances, things of that nature.
When we were speaking earlier, Chris, too, you mentioned a disconnect for members of our community who might not have the time or the wherewithal based on their own work schedules to show up at meetings or protests. Do you have any thoughts on ways that you can reach into those households and find out what's going on at those kitchen tables?
Sure. And, as I was saying earlier, I think we run into trouble with government and as elected officials when we plan things and we do things based on who shows up at a city council meeting, or who participates in an online poll, or who shows up to a zoning commission meeting. To participate in any of those things, one, requires the time to even know that those things are happening, some awareness of the issues, which a lot of people don't have time to pay attention to most of that stuff. And then you also have to have time to actually go and do that. And if you're working a couple of jobs, if you're taking care of young children, it's really hard to show up to a city council meeting to voice your opinion. And so I think we really need to find ways to meet people where they're at. And I don't have a perfect solution or answer for that, but we need to figure out how to do that. Because if people feel like they're not heard, we've seen the kind of problems that can cause for our democracy. And people get really frustrated when they're not listened to, and I think that's going to be an increasing problem. So, for instance, on my campaign website, elsnerforward5.com, I have a tab called Represent, and I'm using an open source platform called Polis, which is an online discussion tool. I have a couple of topics there, and I preceded each of the discussion topics with some ideas, kind of with different perspectives on the different issues. And so people can click through on each of those discussion topics and say, hey, I like that idea. No, I don't like that idea. I'm going to pass on that idea. Or more importantly, they can enter their own idea of what they think about that problem, how they would solve it. Because if we're not listening to the whole community, if we're not listening to everyone's voices, we're going to miss a lot of really great ideas and ways to make our lives and make our community better.
I love that idea. And to your point, reaching people where they are, having some preceded notions, as you described it on your website, is a great way. People could do that from their couch, from their smartphones. As many people who follow the elections closely, more people sat out than voted for either candidate in the general last time, which is definitely an indictment on the level of engagement that most politicians are achieving. So props for that. So we've got a couple of deadlines that are coming up in terms of the primary in August and the general in November, but you've got one that's a red letter date that's looming a little bit closer than that, correct?
Yes, 5:30 p.m. on April 7th. It's a Monday. That is when the nominating petition signatures are due to get onto the Democratic primary ballot. And so if I am not on the ballot, then I don't really need to worry about the primary in August or the general in November. And so that is the deadline that I'm working on and most focused on right now.
So that's about 3 weeks out. And just for our listeners, we do have Chris's petitions here at PCDP, along with the other candidates. But for equal representation, if you like what you're hearing, you're welcome to stop by and sign his. And you mentioned your website, but to make sure we get the spelling of it correct, it's your last name, Elsner, ELSNER, 4, all spelled out, FOR, Ward 5. So Elsner for ward5.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And we'll link that down below for the description on this. And is there anything as we wrap up here, Chris, that you'd like listeners to know about why, again, you think that you'll be a good candidate for council member?
Yeah, like I've said a few times here, I'm very committed to being a servant leader and serving my community. I feel like a lot of politicians these days don't put the community first, but that's what I'm here for. I was pretty reluctant to run for office for a long time, despite being pretty engaged and paying attention to politics, because the idea of having to go raise so much money just to run for office seems antithetical to representing people, because we have way too much money in our system. And I feel like that is also a source of frustration for so many people that if you don't have money, if you can't write big checks, if you are not a big corporation, then you don't have a say in how things are run. I think the Supreme Court has made some pretty disastrous decisions related to, the Citizens for Clean, or not Citizens for Clean Action.
Citizens United.
Citizens United. Thank you. I was blanking on that for a moment. That, money is speech, and I don't agree that money is speech. Money is power, and if you have all the money and you have all the power, it drowns out everyone else's speech. And I think we are seeing the consequences of that day in and day out. That our public institutions are failing us, and government is not working as well because the people with money and the people with power are the ones controlling everything. And I think we need to really focus, particularly as the Democratic Party, on meeting individuals where they're at, listening to them, giving their voice and hearing their concerns, making sure that we are actually representing them and not our own self-interest. So that's what I'm committed to doing as a candidate, and something I hope I can bring forward to the city. I'm not shy about speaking my mind. I'm a pretty honest person. I don't have problems asking tough questions of people that are more powerful than me. My friends know I'm not shy about doing that. And so my hope is that people will be able to trust me as a candidate because they know that I'm willing to listen to their concerns and serve their needs in the community, and put their needs before my own, because we got to start building trust back in the community.
I appreciate that. We've been here with Chris Elsner, candidate for Ward 5. Thanks again for being with us, Chris.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.